I lost my sense of being. I lost my sense of balance, and that had a direct impact on performance. You require confidence. That's something that is always associated with athletes, about this self belief, and I had absolute none of it.
A lot of Indian athletes are now preparing to go to Paris. How important is mental health as part of their preparation and for sport in general?
Well, I think mental health is the foundation, is the foundation of human well-being, and it is the foundation of performance. You just talked about Paris and athletes preparing for Paris, and of course, when you go and compete at an event as the Olympics, the grandest stage of all, the mental side obviously plays a very big role. And, often there is a lot of commentary on the psychology of an athlete and the mental toughness that is required by athletes. But let me tell you that, the base and foundation of all mental toughness for every athlete comes from how stable they are as human beings, how physically healthy they are. That's often talked about, but also how mentally stable and how mentally healthy they are, how mentally balanced they are, not as athletes but as human beings.
Right.
And I think that sometimes, like in any other pursuit of excellence, whether it be sport, whether it be the arts, whether it be corporate life, I think society sometimes dehumanizes that effort to a great degree whenever you are chasing excellence. And I think in sport that also happens at times. But I think it is very, very important to ensure that human well-being is at the heart and center of performance. And that is something that I think from the role and the work that I've done or been engaged in the last couple of 3, 4, 5 years has really focused on. It has focused on firstly advocacy, firstly breaking stigma, which is massive in this area, not just in sport, but in society. And I think over the last few years, I think one of the only silver linings of this COVID pandemic has been the destigmatization of mental health to a degree, because I think
Right.
all naysayers of mental health and suddenly had issues on their own. And I think there is now a greater sensitivity to this topic to an extent. And I think that has helped. And I think that has also helped in sport. But I think the Olympic movement in particular started acknowledging the importance of mental health even far before the pandemic. And when the pandemic actually came by, we were quite ready to provide support to athletes, provide resources to athletes. So there's been a lot of work that has happened there, right from creation of tools which assess mental health. Physical health of athletes is always assessed several times during the course of the year, but now there is a validated tool which also looks at the mental health side of an athlete, for example. And this is the work that the group has done. There has been a toolkit which has been prepared for organizations to really prioritize mental health and help create psychologically safe environments for athletes. But really, it's not just about the athletes. It's really, again,
Hmm.
important to note is the environment that is created around the athlete, how psychologically safe it is. So the entourage, the coaches, the administration have an equally responsible role to play in ensuring the mental health of athletes, because that has a direct impact on our lives.
There's something that you said which is very interesting about how there is so much more acceptance of this now, and the stigma is kind of getting over. In India, we've had many athletes talking about it now. Virat Kohli's talked about it. PV Sindhu's talked about this. I think you've spoken about this significantly. So, what more can we do to kind of lift stigma around this for athletes? Because there are still a lot of athletes who kind of still suffer from this, right?
So see, I think it needs education is a massive aspect here, huh? Sensitizing the environment. is a very important aspect. I'll give you a small anecdotal example, which may be useful to understand. My foundation does a lot of work also in this area, amongst many other areas of work. One of our areas of work is athlete mental health. And when we started working in different sports environments, there was a lot of uh, stigma and there was a lot of pushback that we kind of received early on from coaches, from the administration, etc. So suddenly we we, at least I realized that the importance of the subject. So we kind of changed our strategy. So instead of going to the athletes, we started workshops, we started seminars on coaches' mental health.
Hmm.
They're also human beings. They're also in very high pressure jobs. They could also face issues. Their well being, nobody thinks of. In a sports career, the athlete is the center of everything. But there are many players to the story. So we started doing a lot of workshops on that, and that suddenly was a game changer. Number one, the coaches are very happy because nobody has ever asked about their well being. Right. So they were kind of like taken aback. Oh, finally, somebody's asking about how we are feeling.
Hmm.
So that was a positive breakthrough. And just by education, by understanding, there was a greater amount of sensitivity that was achieved. And that I think has been a very big breakthrough because, coaches are the real mentors. They are the day to day touch point of an athlete, right? They are the ones on what sort of an environment is created for an athlete day in and day out, which directly impacts their physical and mental well-being. So that was a very important aspect, and that really helped us. Then the coaches started becoming an ambassador of this work, and that has helped us reach more athletes because the coaches themselves are saying, yeah, this is an important subject to their wards, and telling them to encouraging them to attend whatever we do, or encouraging them to start thinking about this aspect. And yes, there are two elements, Nalin, to this aspect. There is an element of when you have a problem, like how do you deal with this issue? But there's also massive work that needs to be done on prevention.
Right.
And why when there is a problem, there are certain protocols that you can set. I mean, you need to consult a mental health practitioner, etc., etc. There are tools. There are ways to deal with it. But the more important and the deeper work that needs to happen, which will also take a much longer period of time, is the preventive aspect, and that is really about it's a tough one because as society we are so outcome driven.
Hmm.
You know what sometimes happen and very often happens. Athletes, the self athletes put their self worth to where they find their name on the ranking list of a sporting competition, which I think is absolutely idiotic because you're basing your happiness on where your name will appear on a ranking list of a sporting competition, and sport is so. I mean, there's no guarantee in sport, right? It's
Yeah.
so that is the beauty of sport, that it is so unpredictable. So
So
you
so.
can't you have to build different parts of you as a person. You can't
Hmm.
just have one pillar as an
Hmm.
athlete. You need to balance, and
Hmm.
that is
Hmm.
balance as humans, right? I mean, whether you are a journalist, whether you are heading Moneycontrol, or whether you are heading a multi-billion-dollar corporation, your personal performance is really dependent on how you are feeling as a human being. If you're feeling unhappy, if you're feeling cranky, if you're feeling tired and worn out, it's going to affect your decision making. It's going to
Yeah.
affect how you perform at the workplace, and it is absolutely the same for athletes.
So you're saying something very profound here, Abhinav, because you're talking about a much larger thing than just sort of sporting achievement, or achievement in any sphere for that matter. And there are lessons from this that business leaders or other leaders in other fields can also draw. Right, the same principle applies there for people who sort of run big companies or run hedge funds and things like that. Would you say so?
Absolutely. You know, For example, I sit on the board of Bajaj Auto, so I know what a large corporation is. I know what a large uh, what it entails, what the day-to-day pressures are like, and I think large corporation businesses, they all have an athlete's mindset.
Hmm.
We are all after certain outcomes, but this outcome is dependent on so many things going right. It's all about fixing, or it's all about setting processes. It's all about having adaptability. It is all about dealing with the unexpected challenges that come your way. So I think business leaders also, to a degree, have an athletic mindset. But again, that mindset can only be at its peak performance, as we as athletes talk, when
Hmm.
the, when you know the humanization of that effort is not overlooked, and you're feeling good physically, you're feeling good mentally. That gives you the best possible chance to be performing at the workplace in a sustainable way. You can push yourself through a crisis or a personal crisis when you're not feeling good once, twice, thrice, but at some
Hmm.
time you're going to break down. And there again, I think it's that prioritization of that human effort, I think is important. And I think that is critical, as you said, to all walks of life, whether it be business, whether it be the arts, anything that is
Hmm.
uh, which is chasing excellence.
Hmm.
Um, it's very easy to tip the other way. It is very easy to become obsessed, like I was as an athlete. So I know the two sides of it because I've experienced it. I've lived through it.
So tell us. I mean, there are so many things you said. So a few strands from that. So let me pick out a couple of them. I don't know how much time you have, but one, um, because what you're talking about is so profound and touches pretty much everybody in whatever sphere they are. So, and you've dealt with this, and you've dealt with mental pressures and all of these things. So how did you deal with mental health pressures when you were performing at the peak? Or and you talked about how your identity shouldn't be linked to uh, being on a sports list. So how did you deal with all of that?
So I think we have to firstly separate mental health from mental performance. I think that is very important. There are two very different aspects to it. But let me start with a confession, which I think is an important thing to do. Um, while I achieved many goals in my life, and while I achieved many goals, I won a gold medal at the Olympics, I won a world championship, I failed. I failed miserably. I failed miserably to achieve my fullest potential. And looking back dispassionately, I can very honestly attribute that massive failure of mine to the lack of balance that I had as a human being. I was so obsessed. I put all my eggs in one basket, which I lost my sense of being. I lost my sense of balance, and that had a direct impact on performance because I was an athlete always struggling to have any degree of self-belief. I was always assailed by tremendous amount of anxiety. And as athletes, we you need belief. You require confidence. That's something that is always associated with athletes about this self-belief. And I had absolute none of it. And I would attribute, because I had no balance, all my eggs were in one basket. Uh, I was always trying to chase perfection, which chasing perfection is chasing an untamable beast. So I never looked at what went right. I always looked at what went wrong. And that had an impact, and that certainly had an adverse impact on and limitations on reaching my fullest potential. You can also argue it had positives because it propelled me to really push myself, and I fully agree to that and admit it. But I think the limitations were more than the positives, and the limitations were that it limited me from really achieving more. It limited me from achieving my fullest potential. However, how did I deal with this? I dealt with it by learning to coexist with it, by learning to accept the situation that I am not going to have self belief. I'm not going to have, I'm going to be assailed by a lot of anxiety. I'm going to feel horrible before competition. I'm not going to be able to sleep. I'm going to probably have a couple of nervous vomits prior to competition. It was acceptance, accepting that there would be pressure. And once you accept it, you learn to coexist with it, learn to work with it. And that is what I did. I didn't chase self-belief. I chased self-respect. And I chased self-respect by just giving it my all, by trying to be the best that I could be and trying to leave absolutely no stone unturned. So that was what I,
Mm.
that's how I kind of learned to cope. That was my coping mechanism.
That's fantastic. That's really profound to hear. A couple of last things to ask. Uh, what has changed in the last few years, of course, is social media and the amount of pressure and the treadmill that additionally adds to what people do. I remember, for example, before the last Olympics, Gopi took away Sindhu's phone for a few months before the Olympics. The training as a way of keeping her less distracted. So, what is your sense of social media and the
Well, I
impact on
think, see, I
athletes?
think it comes with its positives. I think it democratizes sport to a greater degree, where athletes are able to share their journeys. Especially less athletes from lesser sports where there's not much fan engagement. It helps them connect with a larger audience, which in earlier times, in my times, for example, it wasn't quite there. So there are lots of positives to it, but I think from an athlete's perspective and from a performance perspective, and also which also leads to a well-being perspective, is not to overdo it and to find a balance in how much you're going to do. At the end of the day, you have to be a better athlete on the field of play. You're not going to be a better athlete if you get more likes on Instagram.
Hmm.
That I think needs to be acknowledged by athletes. And at the end of the day, the pursuit has to be pure. The pursuit has to be of excellence on the field of play. Uh, and I think there needs to be, as athletes, as I was saying earlier, if, as athletes, we need to also be responsible and act
Hmm.
responsibly. At the end of the day, athletes are role models. At the end of the day, athletes are public figures to a certain degree and have the power to shape young minds and have the power to shape society as well in many ways. So I think that response, whatever they say, whatever they portray, needs to be done in a very responsible way. And I think that is something that athletes will need to keep in mind while dealing with this. So, I mean, social media is here to stay. It's not going to go away, and its technology and newer technologies are only going to immerse more in coming times. But I think it's all about keeping three important aspects in mind: staying true to your values, staying true to your pursuit, never compromise on the purity of your pursuit of excellence, of doing the best that you can as an athlete, and being a positive role model to the youth, to society. I
So,
think these are things
so, so,
important.
so, so you would say it also brings a lot of responsibility, right? I mean, because what you said something very interesting about that you perform on the field and not so much likes and forwards and all of that. But it all because sports people have such a large influence in society as role models and so on. So it also brings a lot of responsibility about when people say something, takes people take it seriously, right?
Absolutely, and I think social media should not start cutting into your performance time, right? In
Hmm.
the sense that I mean, now and I know anecdotally that some athletes have lost balance in it, where they'll spend more time trying to build social media content than they're actually training. Because building content is not an easy joke as well. It is also hard work, and I acknowledge that. But their primary role is to be athletes, and their primary role is to be the best that they can on the field of play. And I think they must never compromise on that aspect. And of course, whatever they say, their words carry weight, and I think that needs to that everybody must need to be responsible, because as athletes, what is sport? Sport is always built on certain value sets. That is what sport gives hope to society. And athletes are the true ambassadors of these values. If sport had no values, you think there would be any fan base for sport? Probably not. It is these sheer values of sport that intrigue society towards sport.
So,
And
so we
athletes
have.
are the ambassadors of these values and in all what they do. And again, we are humans and we are flawed and we're not going to be perfect every time. But I think an attempt to be the best that you can be an attempt to act responsibility, and sometimes we will err, and that's absolutely fine, and that's human. But I think there needs to be they just need to keep it in the back of their mind.
How do you deal with the after impact of controversies like this?
I think it is about, frankly, again, no easy answer there, Nalin. I haven't necessarily dealt with it myself, so I have not experienced it myself to that great degree. So, but I think it is about, firstly, being responsible. I think it is important to show empathy, empathy on all sides. I think empathy in society is something which is becoming less and less uh, world over, and I think that is the most important aspect that keeps a human bond going and keeps humanity going is empathy to each other. We're living in a world where there is so much egoism and there is so much nationalism, and we're seeing a different world. We're seeing a
Hmm.
changing world order, and that is obviously changed, also
So,
showcasing.
in the middle of this, Abhinav, uh, we have a contingent going to Paris in the middle of all the uncertainty. What would your word of advice be to them, and what do you expect in this game? And that's my last question.
Well, I think the athletes are going there as ambassadors of our great country. So, firstly, more than anything, they must first and foremost be wonderful ambassadors of our country at this world stage. They are also ambassadors of sport. They are going to be Olympians, and Olympians are special people in many ways, and the Olympics is a very special event in many ways, Nalin, because we were just talking about these difficult times that the world is seeing, and perhaps the Olympic Games is probably the only event left in the world where the world comes together, competing in intense competition, but peacefully. And these
Yeah.
athletes are the real ambassadors of this. So I think they should be superbly proud to be Olympians. Of course, there's a performance side of it as well, and I would only tell them to try and be the best that they can be, to go about their preparation with absolute integrity, and give it their heart, give it all they have, and more importantly, at the end of the day, enjoy the journey, enjoy the process, and try to perform at the best that they can be. And of course,
You think we'll do? You
as
think we'll do
many
better?
will come back, many will come back with victories. Most will not come back with victories because that is the very nature of sport. But that doesn't mean that they are losers in any way. They are wonderful ambassadors. They are champions in their own right. And as society and as athletes who are also in first hand going through this experience, we all must acknowledge that, and we must cheer on all these
Hmm.
very the different facets of sport, not just look at sport at the three people who will stand up on the podium.
Thank you so much, Abhinav, and thank you so much for spending so much of time and for such a stimulating conversation.
No, my pleasure. Hope to see you soon.